All right. Welcome everybody to 2018's first contributor experience call. George and I will be hosting today in lieu of Elsie and Garrett due to illnesses. Garrett is on the line though, but he's resting up. So we do have a full agenda today, but first things first, I actually wanted to do something a little bit different and see if there are any new contributors on the call that would like to introduce themselves. If not, then I think it might be our regular peeps. It looks like it's our regular peeps. So hi, regular peeps. And then another thing I wanted to do, which is kind of diverting off the agenda for 1 second, is if you're currently working on a contributor experience initiative, let's just do a really quick stand up, because I think it would be good to kind of see where everybody is and what everybody's doing. And by stand up, I mean like less than 30 seconds about what you're working on, and then we'll go ahead through the agenda. And if there's any space at the end, then what we can do is go back to folks from the stand up and talk to them and do a little bit more of a deep dive. So does anybody want to go first about any contributor experience initiatives that they're working on? Tim, I know you're working on one.
Okay, fine.
I can. Oh, Tim is there.
Yep.
I work at VMware, and VMware obviously is a company that's a little bit newer, coming to the Kubernetes and container space with a virtual machine legacy. So I'm acting sort of as a liaison between the Kubernetes community and the folks who are starting up and learning about Kubernetes in the company. And maybe calling it a contributor experience initiative is a little much, but yeah, I'm thinking in terms of liaison and just trying to give people a focal point to interact with the community and help guide them.
Cool. And you're also doing great work on helping us with the contributor guide, so pat yourself on the back for that. Does anybody else want to talk about anything that they have going on right now for contributor experience before we get into the agenda? I think, Sadev, you did.
Oh no, I just wanted to mention that one of the things I'm working from X side is trying to define those if we can get the metrics for issue triage side. So I had some work in progress. I know before I think end of last year, sometime in December, I shoot an email. But that's one thing I'll be looking and I think by next meeting I should have a little bit more updates. But I know I did talk to Garrett about that at the KubeCon, and something in line will go forward.
Awesome. Aaron, I think you're working on something too for contributor experience, bot stuff.
I don't think I can fit it in 30 seconds. So I'm going to add stuff to so well, let's just see how much time
is bot stuff a good 30-second summary?
I'm filing a bunch of issues as suggestions that we make a priority for 110, and I'm working on standardizing how we interact with all of our repos through bot format. So that's both attempting to document all of the teams that we have, removing write access from those repos that no longer need it to bots, and gradually adding more repos to have merge automation enabled. I'll keep adding to the agenda and see what we can get to.
Good. Yeah, let's get to that in depth in a second. Does anybody have anything else that they want to add, sort of stand-up format?
Okay, so you want me to talk briefly about the stuff I'm doing that connects to?
Yeah, do it.
So I've been working on user journeys and like importing docs from other repos, and they should hopefully connect to the contributor experience in like the developer and contributor guides, so people can see it on Kubernetes.io instead of having to necessarily like find it in the repos directly.
Yay, discoverability. What is up? All right, so let's get right into it. Like I said, we do have a full agenda today. First up,
I have just one note from me.
Yeah. Go ahead.
As I mentioned before in November, it was November, yeah, I've been working on a slide deck regarding how to get started with the contributions to CNCF space and Kubernetes and so on. So unfortunately, because of the total KubeCon Cloud Native Con mess, it wasn't been published in a proper way, but A few days ago, someone mentioned it in Contributor Experience chat, so feel free to use it if you need it. It's also duplicated in CNCF/presentations, GitHub/CNCF presentations. That's
awesome.
all.
Good. That's a good resource. Thank you.
And you asked for a quick stand-up. This is Chris Love. Been working with Paris on the mentorship program. Yeah, probably goes well. So we've kicked that off. We've got, what do we have? 3 groups of 4?
Yes.
Or we got like 15 mentees working with 4 mentors, and moving forward with that and trying to figure out what the heck we're doing and trying to make it awesome, and completely expect to fall a bit and pick ourselves back up. So having fun reviewing PRs. There we go.
And we will, we'll talk about mentoring in detail in a second here on the agenda. All right. Thanks, Chris. All right. So first things first is DevStats. I feel like everybody on this call is familiar with DevStats. I mean, or at least has visited the site. If not, it's devstats.cates.io. I'll put that in the agenda right now. The thing with DevStats I think that we keep bringing up is defining what charts mean to us in what ways. For instance, I'll give you an example. Linux Foundation reached out and said that they'd like to start showing reporters and different people who inquire about Kubernetes, especially Kubernetes velocity. They'd like to start pointing them to certain charts and certain stats on DevStats. So their comment to us is what's important to us and what do we think shows the velocity of this project, and conversations like that. I gave them a couple suggestions, asked a couple of you individually what you thought as well. So I wanted to just open up the conversation for a broader discussion of what matters. So I wanted to open up the floor to any discussions about what you think matters from a metric standpoint as it relates to measuring the health of this community.
Yeah, I got a big one. We're incorrectly measuring the difference between approvers and reviewers right now. So I view the health of the project as growing in the correct direction if the number of people who can say yes, a PR is good to go and have the final say is growing. I call those people approvers. An approver is defined by the person living inside of an owner's file under the field approvers. Right now, DevStats doesn't have any knowledge of that. Their approvers graph generally looks for people who use the /approve command. And anybody who reviewed PRs over a while and who has the appropriate superpowers may be aware that you can /LGTM a pull request, and the bot will interpret that as simultaneously both looks good to me and an approval. And DevStats doesn't know enough to recognize that, which means that DevStats is probably undercounting the number of approvers that we have in the project as more and more people just get used to using /LGTM. I've raised this on an issue that I linked in the agenda, and am suggesting that we find ways to have DevStats measure the growth of people in owners' files over time as a metric for health of this project. Until that time, I kind of have a problem pointing to any graph that talks about approvers as meaningful in terms of this project. Reviewers is still meaningful because that's like anybody who drops into LGTM, I think, or maybe anybody who uses the GitHub approve feature for a review request. That's cool. That going up and to the right is a good thing. But we don't today have an effective measurement of how many people are capable of approving a change. George.
And is that something you're working on with Lucas? I'm sorry.
I'm attempting to clarify it. I don't know how much more bandwidth I'll have, but yeah, I'm trying to keep that comment trail going.
Okay, cool. What can we help? No, go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
A huge question I've had about DevStats, does that include the sub-projects or is that just core?
It's every single repository in the following 4 organizations: Kubernetes, Kubernetes-client, Kubernetes-helm, Kubernetes-incubator.
Groovy. Perfect.
There are some charts use repository groups, which is a little vague and unclear to me. I'd rather see every single repository mapped to a SIG that owns it, but we'll get to this. There's kind of unclear ownership of which SIG owns what. So the definition of what is a repository group is a SQL file that's linked somewhere in DevStats. And if you're curious, I can send you that link. But it says things like what is the project infra group, what is the cluster lifecycle group, what is the contrib group, and it defines it in terms of repos across those orgs.
And I think, George, you had something to add.
Yeah, I found the original bug. I think, I think pointing people to those charts is good, but I'm hesitant because I found that bug, and I initially found it because I noticed people were missing, and that was I only looked at SIG cluster lifecycle because I was familiar with them, and I looked, and I don't know. I would just like to, if they're gonna like bless a chart as this one's okay, I would like at least for some of us to be able to go dig. Like there's some like my company was totally missing in one, Lucas was missing in another, and I feel like we should scrub them a bit more. Yep. You know, sort of like how Aaron does before he presents it towards the community meeting. Hey, does this look sense? Does this make sense? Is this tracking?
Well, is there any in there right now that aren't approver reviewer related that would measure the velocity of the project? I see Aaron think that's Aaron's thinking face.
I mean, I think I pointed some of these charts to you, like although we know that companies like to game the system, I still think the company's velocity chart is an interesting chart to show, especially how it differs across different projects. When I started making suggestions here, what I was doing was looking at year over year, what Q4 2017 looked like versus Q4 2016. And there was definitely some movement amongst the top contributing companies overall, as well as in individual contributions, whether that was issues filed or commits or pull requests or comments. And it looked even more different on Prometheus was the other project I was looking at. And so I was trying to make suggestions for charts that generally made sense across all of the CNCF related projects, not just Kubernetes. And Kubernetes is the only project that has that weird like approvers versus reviewers distinction. So another useful agnostic chart in that sense might be pull requests merged over time. Again, that's something that can be easily gamed, but sort of seeing what the delta looks like over time is interesting. And that kind of, I mean, like, I think DevStats as a whole has been a good place for experimentation, but I would not point to it as an authoritative thing that has been thoroughly vetted by members of the community for authenticity and validity of data, as well as usefulness for day-to-day use, right? Like, that is totally on us to do right now. So one example would be there are like 4 or 5 different dashboards for pull requests merged. The dashboard I use most often is PRs merged because that's the one that shows pull requests merged broken down by repository, not repository group. And so like generally in my day-to-day job, whenever I have a question, I first see if I can ask DevStats that question. So as I've been trying to turn on merge automation for various repositories across the Kubernetes organization, I use that chart to answer the question, which repositories are merging the most stuff in the past 90 days? And I can do that with DevStats. That's great.
And I think I did give them that suggestion. Does anybody else have any comments on this? And then what we'll do is sidebar it for next time, and also we can continue it on the mailing list. Any DevStats thoughts about measuring the health of the community? All right. So there is we are doing a DevStats bi-weekly during the off weeks, Fridays for 15 minutes at 1 o'clock Pacific. If anybody would like the invite, just reach out. We pick a chart and pretty much define it and vent and talk about what we're seeing on our screen so that we can better understand what's going on. Also, Aaron, you are on the hook for tomorrow's chart of the week, or what are we calling it now? It's pie graph of the week or something for community meeting. Cool. All right. And yeah, we'll start to do that too. Every community meeting, for those who haven't been on, we're going to do a dev stats of the week to try to educate the larger population of people about dev stats and see if they can use it in their lives for whatever reason. All right. So next on the list, we have SIG testing to roll out developer workflow changes. Steve, are you on the line?
Steve is not here. I'll speak for him just that we recognize that both of these SIGs have overlap in ownership of code bases. We both independently seem to have ideas on how things could be automated to make things better for the community. And we're just trying to find the best way to make sure there's clear communication between these SIGs. I am personally doing that right now by attending both SIGs and being an active participant here and the lead over in SIG testing. You may see Steve show up in the future, but I think this is sort of a placeholder for, like, if you have any pain points where it feels like we've been stepping on each other's toes, you know, let us know. Let's talk about how we can make that more efficient. But if there's nothing substantive to discuss, we can address that as needed. Okay.
I just say thank you for doing that. There's not enough people doing that cross-SIG type of work, and it's actually really huge what you're doing.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you, Aaron.
All right, Andrew, you touched a little bit during stand-up about user journeys and personas. George, did you want to also add anything about what's going on with the docs on the community repo right now? Yeah, no, definitely. Merge those two. Is everybody familiar with what George is talking about with the with Joe wanting to create a community site? I think everybody on this call, I'm looking at the Zoom list. I think everybody in this call is in the loop. Okay, cool.
I'll register a healthy note of skepticism as somebody who didn't attend the meeting, so I was not the recipient of all of Joe's enthusiasm, but I would kind of prefer that we focus first and foremost on making sure that the content that we have is meaningful before we find some new place to put that content up. So, like, I think there are members of this group who've been doing a fantastic job on trying to reduce the definition of the contributor's guide to something that's more digestible. And I think that effort is still ongoing. And there's probably a bunch of other pages inside of the community repo that maybe don't make much sense anymore, or maybe don't need to be around anymore. And I sort of view, anytime there's this, like, you know what we should do? We should make another website. It always feels like I'm going to go make my little secret garden over here, and I'm going to put in just the things that make sense to me, and then pretty soon it grows and grows because it's not weeded effectively. And, like, we already have a garden with all sorts of great content. It's called Community Repo.
Yeah.
Now, I recognize that it doesn't necessarily, like, live alongside the user-facing documentation, so it doesn't look as pretty, but I still feel like most of the effort that is needed right now is in making sure that content is clear and meaningful and not just a wall of opaque text to people when they come and visit it. but that's just my curmudgeonly opinion.
Let me address your concerns. So the docs Andrew is importing right now isn't like, it's not grabbing like the huge devil /contrib. There's like 500 markdown files in there. What it's doing is he's grabbing the contrib guide directory, which is kind of just showing the stuff that's curating. So right now it only shows like the index that Guinevere worked on. Like for keps, like it only shows like the one kep that Caleb wrote, like kep 1, which is like the definition of keps. So I think you can work on the presentation bits while the content grooming is happening, because I don't think necessarily that's the same people, and I don't know, it feels like we know where the curated stuff is going to land. So I think we can kind of, like, it's not just automatically generating everything in the community repo. There's like 4 directories that we chose. It was like the mentorship guide, the contrib guide, /keps, and I think there's one more.
Yeah, so the way the script works now, there's a config file where you have to specify, like, right now it's just individual files. So right now we just have like 4 files defined. So we're not importing it wholesale, and so someone has to actually decide which things are imported. Later on, we can add features where it might like import a whole directory or something like that. But for this phase 1, we're just kind of keeping it small and simple.
How are we handling linking to related files, like, sign the CLA?
Yeah, there was one issue that came up, which is that all the files use relative links. So we're adding some code, hopefully this week, that will rewrite the URLs. So when it's imported over, it will point back to the original locations for any links that are mentioned in the files.
So it'll have external links back to the location in community.
Yeah, that's the hope.
Yeah, and then Joe wasn't able to attend the meeting, but he showed me late yesterday. He was experimenting with some stuff, and I think it would make sense to have him kind of, either we do like a follow-up meeting or maybe next Contrivax to kind of discuss about that, because he's got some ideas about using the kep metadata to like generate interconnecting links in between keps and a whole bunch of things that sounds really complex. So I think we're gonna have to like discuss that sort of stuff.
And Chris Short, you said that you would be willing to help out with this, correct?
That is correct.
Awesome. All right. Is anybody else on the call interested in this work? Building some other kind of community website solution / Joe's idea creation? Whatever at this point.
I'd like to put my ass on this because we are going to develop the similar website for CNCF-wide contributions. So I'd like to be partially involved into this initiative by Kubernetes community. How can we collaborate together on the CNCF-wide effort?
And I'd really like to see any website build. Well, I think website building in particular is a great opportunity to tie together some of our support of mentorship communities, like an Outreachy or a Women Who Code, or Black Girls Who Code, or something like that, who are focused on building web applications, at least in their training.
Yeah, sounds reasonable. Yeah.
There's at least some diversity initiatives we could possibly tie together with this work.
All right. Yeah, so I think it'll be best if we get just a small group of people to get together and figure out next steps with this.
All right. Let me remind everyone, though, including myself, that we could still continue to work on curating the content and everything in the community repo, and the presentation stuff we'll figure out like down the road. So don't let that block anybody if you're.
Yep, there's still plenty of contributor guide work to do. I know Gwen's on the call right now. She can probably tell you about that. So if anybody on the line wants to help out with the content, there's still plenty to do.
Yes, we will keep Aaron ungrumpy.
All right, next is me. Chris is also on the line for mentoring update. Again, I think since we have most of our regulars, I'm not going to dig too deep into it, but if you have questions, just go ahead and interrupt me. But so we kicked off our test cohort being 12 current members who are looking to be reviewers in owners' files of 3 subsets of the project. We have COPS, Cube, ADM, and Workloads API representing SIG apps. Kicked off meaning we just discussed some logistics, and again that this is a test, and all flexibility is wonderful. Right now what we're doing is putting together the curriculum for the 6 workshops, and I definitely need some help with this. 6 workshops would be spread across 3 months. Why 3 months? 3 months because you have to be a member of good standing according to our community membership file in the community repo to get from member to reviewer. And the 6 workshops are going to cover topics that we would like for reviewers to be not only aware of, but excel in. So obviously topics like code reviewing the Kubernetes way, and anything that we can think of. And this is where I think we can really start to establish learning and development opportunities for our contributors. I did confirm with Tim Hawken yesterday that he's going to do one of the workshops, especially it's going to be a more interactive code review type of an hour of a workshop where we can pretty much just get everything that's in his head and put that pretty much on paper, possibly even record it. So my ask for help for this crew is think about that, not even necessarily from a reviewer perspective, but think about all of the roles that we have within Kubernetes. So member, reviewer, approver. And they all need curriculum too, because ideally what we're doing with the test is we're testing a couple different things. One, we're testing, can we do a 4-to-1 ratio with mentor to mentee in a group environment, and group being because a lot of the positives of group mentoring work with us, I think, like for instance, releasing of time burdens and just peer-to-peer camaraderie and things like that. So that's the test essentially. And I mean, because we know that obviously people can get to these levels self-paced. So that's kind of pretty much what we're testing here. But ideally, I'd like to start another cohort behind this cohort in the very beginning of February. And ideally, I would love to have that all underrepresented folks going from new contributor to member so that we can get some more perspectives within our contributor ladder. But then also I want to keep running these cohorts pretty much simultaneously because we can. That's the cool part about this. So again, really need your help and expertise on coming up with workshop ideas for skills and gaps that should be addressed for all phases of this ladder, if you will. So does anybody have any specific questions about the mentoring program? Oh, actually, one thing I do want to mention is I'm taking this from a multiple step approach. And what that means is everybody is a different learner, and we are trying to, what's the word I'm looking for? We are trying to broaden, what our offerings are. So we're taking it from, a couple different strategies. One is group mentoring. Another one is contributor office hours. And I only say that now because we need a new name, because it is very conflicting with the user office hours. So if anybody on the call is creative and has an idea for that, please let me know. But this is going to take care of our learners who just want to talk to a human, but they're contributors and maybe they've read the docs and they're confused and they're not getting their question answered on Slack. Everybody has that moment where they just want to talk to someone. So that's a part of the mentorship program. And then also Outreachy, which is something that some of you have heard about already. Outreachy pays stipends to underrepresented folks. And we have 2 of those right now reporting into SIG CLI, working on some command creation. And it's really cool watching them grow. So that's the 3 that we're focusing on right now. And then the 4th which is in development, is more event-based, and this is the stuff that you see a lot with new contributor workshops and things that are event on site, like for instance at KubeCon. George and I actually, and Ihor and a couple of folks have started the rumblings for that. So if you're interested in helping out with any of what I've said, there's ample room for at least 50. So please reach out to me, ask me questions right now. Questions, concerns, comments?
Yeah, good question,
Yeah.
Paris. I'm interested in helping out with the workshop, and I did have a very brief chat with George on that.
Yeah.
So the curriculum for the workshop, do we have it online somewhere documented already? I mean, something we can take a look, or
no, nothing. Yeah, we're starting from pretty much scratch here. I mean, ideally, what we would do is we would look to Go as a model. Go actually has done a couple workshops now under their belt for contributors, and they have an outline. And I work with Steve Francia from the Go team, and I'm sure I can get more information from him. So we have sort of, a skeleton, but we definitely need some help with building this out for sure. So
do we have the topics selected for the 6 workshops?
No, we do not. Yep.
Yeah.
So that's
we need to do reviewing code. I know we need to do one on code reviews. That's about as far as we've gotten, unfortunately. So.
Yeah. And communication. So again, everybody on the call, you don't have to answer now, but think about, tonight, think about some, skills that certain reviewers and approvers need that they should have more in-depth training on. Again, the obvious being code reviews and communication, but anything else, just let us know, again, because we're building this out.
Okay, should we just discuss this on Contrib-X mailing list to follow up on the details?
Yep.
Okay.
All right. And
I have an extra question regarding mentoring. It's not directly related to the topic that you've just presented for us, Paris, but do we have any plans for Google Summer of Code for 2018?
Not to my knowledge, but it would be really cool if we did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because again, at CNCF GitHub repo, we have recently archived 2017's program, and we are happy to start working on 2018's. But without your support, without the community support, it won't happen. So if there is any person who would like to help us with driving this, it'd be great. Please let me know. An extra question, we have Cameron Zahedi here mentioned, but I'm not sure that he's focused on Kubernetes and CNCF projects from Google anymore.
No, he's not on CNCF stuff.
Okay.
All right, so that sounds like another opportunity for anybody on the call that wants to jump in is Google Summer of Code. Which would definitely be cool. And also, I do want to mention, like, if anybody has any other mentoring ideas, I know I take up a lot of this meeting's time, but if anybody has any actual ideas, like another strategy that we should be doing, you'll notice that I have not included one-on-one type of forced mentoring matching. If you, feel like that's a good approach, then let's do it and run with it. So please feel free to be open about any ideas that you might have as well. What's next topic here? Oh, SIG, it's also me. Cool. I wanted to see if the SIG would be interested in doing a face-to-face planning session in Q1. George and I actually just had a kind of a one-off conversation about us getting together recently, so I thought it might be a good idea to, if the group thought it might be a good idea to do like a one-day, face-to-face summit. I did one recently for SIG Storage. Helm's having one, and we're also trying to get a bunch of the other SIGs to do face-to-face meetings so that we don't have to have huge face-to-face contributor meetings to sort of break this down. Is anybody in agreement or in disagreement about potentially starting the organization for a face-to-face summit? Do it in Michigan, Ann Arbor. Yeah.
Just
Michigan.
just a time and place proposal.
Yeah.
So IBM is organizing the Index conference in San Francisco on February 20th. And they have 6 free rooms for anybody from CNCF and CNCF related to meet there. So if you are in the Bay Area, I would like to land in Bay Area for February 20th. We can meet in Moscone Center during the IBM conference. It will be totally free for us.
All right, well, let's put in, I'll do like a little poll on the mailing list and see what everybody's thoughts and feelings are about locations and dates and times. But essentially, I'm just thinking like a one-day summit. We, attack some PRs, get some stuff done, and call it a day.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense.
If we pick a location in the U.S., I'm willing to run with organizing it.
Okay, cool.
I can help organize one in Europe. I would just need someone else to handle logistics as opposed to content.
Okay.
We can do it for Europe, for example, before, after Copenhagen event. But for the nearest time, I can strongly propose to have their Bay Area meeting, for example, because we have almost everything prepared for it.
Well, that actually brings up KubeCon. So for KubeCon, did we want to do either an update or a deep dive for Europe?
I'd like to have it in Copenhagen.
Okay, so we'll do at least a deep dive. I'm sorry, at least an update, which is 30 minutes, and that's what we owe to the community is what we're doing, what we're working on, and then the deep dive is where we try to get some work done, but we'll do at least 30 minutes for update.
Yeah, that deadline's in 2 days, right?
No, not for the SIG updates.
Oh, so okay, awesome.
Just for CFPs. Yeah, and everybody on the call, the CFP does not include SIG updates. So CFP is just if you're presenting or a co-presenter is presenting. Okay. All right. And then let's go to Aaron. We only have we have 15 minutes or so left, and we have a ton of stuff to do.
Okay.
Aaron, it looks like you're talking for a while, so I'm just going to mute.
Okay. So we as a SIG need to come to consensus on what our plans are for 110. I have a couple suggestions. I think we should actually have a document that we all follow at some point. So I had some free time. I had some weeks without SIG meetings. So I started doing some stuff and filing issues. And some of these I may need to hand off to other people. And this seemed like the right SIG to do it. So I think 2018 should be the year of finally documenting what all of our GitHub labels are. I have all these are links to issues where I sort of suggested how we could do this. I think once we document what the GitHub labels are, we should remove all the non-standard undocumented GitHub labels. I think we should replace the priority failing test label with a kind failing test label because it doesn't make any sense to me to have 2 priorities assigned to the same issue. That's just a pull request away. We have talked here before. I'm bringing it up again, so it's written down in a document that I can link to. I think we should remove the outside collaborator role in favor of lowering the requirements for org membership in general. Part of what I would be curious to see is something that surveys how outside collaborator is being used across repositories across the organization. I recently, as a member of the steering committee, now have admin access to all the repos, so hopefully I can do this soonish. But it has been interesting to see how many repos have people with admin access that aren't part of the Kubernetes org. They've just been merging pull requests all day long. That seems weird. I think we should really be pushing hard to make sure that bots are the primary way that we interact with all of our repositories. And so doing, we should remove direct write access to repositories except for those people who really, really, really need it. I already did this for the Kubernetes community repo. When I suggested doing this for the Kubernetes repo, there was much wailing and gnashing of teeth, specifically around 3 use cases. 1, cherry picking labels are not supported by the bot right now. We should look at how we do cherry picking and make sure that can be done by anybody, not just people with write access. We need to facilitate those use cases that involve people directly editing pull requests. I didn't know this happened. Apparently a lot of people do this. Maybe you do it, where like somebody opens up a pull request, but they don't say which issue it fixes. And so you, who have write access to the repo, go and just edit their description for them and say which issue it fixes. Or maybe you adjust the title of their pull request for them so it's cleaner. Or maybe you edit the description so instead of somebody having to read a trail of 40 comments, you can just read an updated TLDR in the description. People do this. I think we should probably support automating some of these use cases rather than continuing to give everybody write access. Or we should at least figure out how many people are actively doing this, pat them on the back for a job well done, because that's pretty thankless work, and restrict it to just that set of people instead of all 75 people. There are like 8 repos now that are published from Kubernetes staging, and it can be confusing to some newcomers who attempt to open up pull requests against those repos that actually staging is the correct place to open up your pull requests. So I've got an issue or PR in flight to make sure that all files live in the staging directory. They don't live in any of the individual repos. And if you try opening up a pull request in those repos, it'll tell you, we don't accept these, please look over here. I think that as a project, maybe it would be a good idea to have a policy of making wikis go away. Wikis require that you have write access to the repository, and I was just advocating that we take away the need for write access so we can include more people. I've already done this for the Kubernetes community repo and the Kubernetes repo. Work that I think relates to this group, but I'm sort of doing under the mandate of the steering committee. I'm trying to actually document a list of all of the GitHub organizations that are part of this project. Thank you to Matt Farina for starting that issue, and I'm trying to understand who I need to get sign-off from before we can have an authoritative list so that I can enlist Ihor's help in chasing down trademark issues if we need to. And then I can merge the next pull request, which documents, well, okay, if it is an organization that's part of the Kubernetes project, what standards does it need to follow? What should, who should be in the organization? Should your membership be public? Should there be a consistent set of teams across these things? What sort of licenses should you have? Blah, blah, blah. I am trying to make sure that every single repository and every single organization that is part of the Kubernetes project points back to Kubernetes community for the code of conduct file, so that we have one file that we can change if we decide we need to change our code of conduct. There has been some wailing and gnashing of teeth over the fact that it's just a redirect to the CNCF's code of conduct, and some repos link to that directly already. The reason for this level of indirection is so that we could, say, replace the wording to talk about Kubernetes specifically instead of CNCF, or perhaps we want to decide that we as a project want to use a slightly different code of conduct than the CNCF. This allows us to make those changes in one place instead of having to open up 80-something pull requests. 2 things I don't have issues open for just yet. These are kind of coming from Brian Grant. 1, the steering committee wants to make sure that all SIGs, like the definition of which SIG owns which repository, is unambiguously clear. Our suggestion for how to do this is to add fields to the sigs.yaml file and start by having that sort of update each SIG's README to say, like, SIG node owns the kubelet repo or whatever. There might be some repos that are a little weird because like multiple SIGs have ownership of a lot of code in those, like Kubernetes. We'll just have to sort of muddle through that. There's also the idea that we talk about the difference between reviewers and approvers and owners in our membership ladder, but we don't substantively differentiate technically between those roles. So we're going to add an owner role to owners files so that there is a person for whom the buck stops. Maybe that owner role is the SIG. I'm still I can't personally defend this one. But this is something that's going to be put forth via a proposal and implemented. I could really use folks' help with the first list, and I would definitely want to make sure that stuff in the second list is not super controversial. That's all I got. George, your hand is up.
Sorry, I have multiple mute buttons when recording. About the code of conduct, I could have sworn when I signed it that we signed the CNCF code of conduct, not a Kubernetes specific one, right?
Kubernetes as a project currently adopts the CNCF code of conduct.
Okay.
But if we ever decide to change our mind to something that is perhaps more detailed than the CNCF code of conduct, so it's like we adopt, you could see the CNCF code of conduct as being like a superset of our stuff. We want to make sure we could do that if we have to without having to go and hit 80 repos. So this is like long pole change now in case we need to do a much more responsive change later.
Okay, so for your pull request, I'm just scanning it real quick. You're proposing to just get rid of all of these and what, make them symlinks or just?
I have made sure that so I'm also trying to make sure that the repo called Kubernetes template project in the Kubernetes org is like, all repos should kind of look like that. And so they should all at a minimum have a contributing.md file, a readme.md file, a code of conduct.md file. And the code of conduct, I've just been making sure that every repo has the exact same code of conduct MD file.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then the second question one about the outside collaborator role. Matt, if you're on this call, I remember we had an email and we were bouncing around the idea of how you would have a Helm chart maintainer person would fit inside a Kubernetes organization as far as membership. And this just reminded me that maybe we should bring that up in a subsequent meeting or something like that.
Yeah, what we ended up doing is we asked people to become actual members and provide their details. And so we've submitted a number of people over to the list so far to have them come in. We're doing it kind of at a slower trickle rather than a thundering herd, but we have sponsored a number of people who've become members.
Oh, so that's all working then. Okay, never mind then. Okay, thank you. That sounds great. More members are.
The system works.
Yay!
Somewhere down the line, another steering committee related thing, I guess I'll just put out as a heads up, is we're trying to put together a proposal to like unblock the whole incubator situation and creation of new repos. And one of the proposal that seems to have gained the most momentum is the idea that every single SIG will get its own GitHub organization. And then SIGs are free to create whatever repo they choose within their organization. And then if something is supposed to be considered part of core Kubernetes, you go through SIG architecture for architectural review to decide whether or not your repo should go into the core Kubernetes org. So the idea is instead of one Kubernetes incubator org, there will now be 28 Kubernetes-SIG-foo orgs. If you have strong opinions about this, I encourage you to provide feedback when this proposal goes out to the broader community. I am currently piloting part of this on behalf of SIG testing. Somebody wants to make a repo to host a reusable framework for integration tests. So I have made a Kubernetes-SIG-testing org and created a frameworks repo therein. It's not, yeah, it kind of does mean like a lot, like discoverability of how do I search for all of the repos that are part of the Kubernetes project is probably going to be a lot more difficult. And it kind of sort of begs the question of how are we going to automate the management of consistent labels and SIGs and membership and process across all of these orgs. So if you have questions or feedback about that, please raise that. We like to hear the voice of the community.
Just would like to avoid a big mess of having like billion of Kubernetes -subs and repos and organizations on GitHub. So that's my primary concern, and the second one is about like is about the actual management of all of them. It's about automation, it's about the unified labeling system, and so on.
Yeah, I was kind of joking in chat about please no new mailing lists, but
right.
Yeah, okay.
and 20 new Slack organizations.
So Aaron, if we do move to this model, does that mean we could go ahead and sunset all those service accounts and that whole madness?
That's a really great question that I encourage you to ask.
Okay, awesome. I will.
And I just dropped in a link to in the chat here about some examples how other open source projects manage their GitHub repositories. Just need to reply to a thread that you, Aaron, and Tim Hawken are on. As coming from Cloud Foundry, I would have much preferred we had followed a structure like OpenStack, where everything is in a single namespace. It was fairly painful as an engineer, or more painful as a team lead, to onboard and offboard people in a bunch of different organizations and making the ACLs work seamlessly there. It ended up becoming multiple people's part-time jobs, which was a shame, just by access to the best automation money could buy.
Yes, I hear you loud and clear, and you will get no disagreement from me on that front. I am certainly one person who is a little familiar with the scope of the automation we have today and how it would have to be improved to support this brave new world. But it would be helpful if we heard the voice of the community on this, because the steering committee does not want to voluntold people. We would like to make sure that we're delegating to the appropriate people to make the right decision. Okay, so I don't know if we're out of time or if I hand off to
we have 5 minutes. Let's do a quick handoff. You didn't talk too much about steering committee stuff. Too much. G-Rod, are you on still?
Yes.
You want to hit the 1.9 goals review?
Yes. We actually minus 5 minutes.
Yeah, we have 4 minutes.
Minus 6. 10:20.
Okay. All right. Well, if do we want to wrap, or G-Rod, do you want to try to get it?
We can wrap this up. I will actually, so Aaron said we should probably be following a document. I'll take the things that didn't get complete from 1.9, add them to Aaron's list of topics, and use that as our 1.10 goals, and I'll send that out. So we can do that asynchronously.
All right. All right, so we are done for this meeting. We will see everybody again in 2 weeks. If you're interested in the DevStats pull-up for every other Friday, let me know, and we'll keep it moving. All right.
Thanks.